Hello and welcome to TransformGov, the digital government podcast with me, Maeve Neefsey. This episode is part 2 of a fascinating interview with our guest, Louise Jevens, the CIO from the Department of Justice. And in part 1, Louise, we touched on so many fascinating subjects, including the fact that Louise joined the public service straight from school at a young age, and then the opportune competition that was run internally meant that she found her love of her life, which is technology. Well, maybe not the love of your life. Your husband probably wouldn't like that. But one of her passions in life, which is technology. And Louise, you've had really a front row seat for the past 30 years to get firsthand insight into digital transformation in Ireland. So welcome. We're dying to hear more. So welcome to Louise.
Thank you.
So including overseeing so many projects in terms of digital transformation, you left then the Department of Taoiseach at what stage? We should mention that at that stage you just finished the project to digitise the Cabinet Office, which was a first, right?
It was
a first in the EU, and amazing that we did that. And then was it a decision to leave, or did somebody approach you and say, look, I've got another opportunity?
No, it was promotion.
Okay.
So again, I think I was on maternity leave then again. And
was this child number 2 or?
Child number 2,
okay.
Yes. Yeah. And I got... actually, that was probably child number 3, it was.
Okay. We better get that right.
Yes. So I ended up working then in the public appointment service. I actually took a career break. That's what it was. I took a short career break. The children were very young at the time.
Yeah, and they were quite close, so that must...
They were very close, yeah. They were like 0, 1 and 3 at one point. So I took a career break for maybe 2 years, and just to kind of get them settled into school. And then I came back into a role in the public appointment service.
Okay.
So there again as head of IT in public appointment service, which again, a small enough IT unit. And it was 2012, so we were just coming out of the financial crash. Things were opening up a bit, and there was huge pressures on PASS, as it's called, to start recruiting staff for public sector. And one of the first competitions that when we opened up was a Garda recruitment campaign, and we hadn't been one for years. So there's a lot of pressure to be able to handle huge amount of campaigns at that particular point in time.
And how many were being hired?
I think there was 120 to be hired initially, but we had 12,000 applications for those 120 posts. So
wow.
Yeah, and like the PASS had and still have. They had publicjobs.ie, which is their front portal, and they had a digital system to take in the applications. But the process in terms of competitions was, you might have to go to a hall or go to a centre and do a written assessment.
Yes. And
all of the interviews were in person. So that was a huge logistical challenge for the organisation when the staffing numbers were low in public appointment service at the time.
Yeah.
And the demand, the business demand was huge. So
I think at that time we had a real thinking of, do more with less. And
technology
with less, exactly. Played a really big role in that.
Yeah, we absolutely did.
And was there a digital strategy, if you like, when you came in? Because I remember, I was looking at this last night. Our first kind of e-government strategy was 2002.
Yeah.
So it was still very new. But was there in place a digital strategy, or did you have to formulate one?
No, and actually at that point, I think really what we had a very forward-thinking CEO in the organisation. It was Fiona Tierney was there at the time.
Yeah.
And she just knew that the challenges were such that we had to come up with other ways of effectively delivering the service and scaling up.
Yeah.
And using technology for that. So I would have worked very closely with the psychologists in PASS who designed the tests for people for campaigns.
Were these kind of knowledge tests or psychology tests, or
there would be a mix of aptitude tests, capability tests, and range of tests. And again, they were largely people came in and sat down with a pencil and did pattern matching in sequences in English and maths and all sorts of complicated, stressful tests. But the challenge was logistically, we were hiring out the RDS or we were hiring out, a centre, and everybody had to be there at the time. So the thoughts at that point was that we had to be able to stabilise publicjobs.ie. So it could handle huge amount of campaigns and applications, but also to put in digital technologies to support online testing.
Okay.
So we brought online testing in and we piloted.
Reminding everybody that was quite revolutionary.
It was very revolutionary.
There was that was a brave move. Was anybody doing online testing in terms of the public sector at that stage?
Not that I'm aware of in public sector, certainly probably in private sector, yes. And we did kind of pilot it on the Garda campaign in particular. It was a way of cutting down the huge numbers that we were having applying for campaigns reasonably, using a reasonable metric. And then later then that went into actually, I think I'd left at the point they started doing online interviews. But again, that was very early in the, pre-COVID that passed. We're looking at transforming the way they did business. And I think at that point it was going from e-government to digital transformation, like a transfer.
Yes.
E-government was where you were basically using electronic technology to replicate what you'd been doing, to digital transformation being you thinking differently about the way you deliver the service. So,
yes.
So it was a really interesting time to work in PAS because in a huge paper-based organisation as well, paper applications and tests.
And what were the challenges? What do you remember particularly things that were difficult?
Well, there were challenges obviously for people getting used to doing things differently. Your job previously was you might be going out and sitting in a large centre, setting up tables, doing testing, and that piece had all been automated. So you were doing different work, doing more challenging work, but it's that piece now where you see with AI and stuff where we're using technology to do routine, mundane work that can be transformational for an organisation in terms of efficiencies and scalability.
The closing date for the Ireland e-Government Awards 2024 is the 17th of July. There are 16 categories to choose from and no project is too small. It's all about the outcome. Entry is free and you can enter as many categories as are relevant. This is your chance to get due recognition for your digital project. Enter now at digitalgovawards.com.
And do you lose people along the way, or people who just can't make that leap?
Certainly, you lose people sometimes on the applicant side. People not necessarily used to using technology, a bit uncomfortable with it. So, PAS are very good at designing their campaigns and choosing what is the appropriate. Like they have psychologists working there who can look, occupational psychologists who look at what is the best way to assess for this particular role or this particular campaign.
Yeah.
But you could possibly rule out people who aren't comfortable using technology and doing tests online. But largely those people would be uncomfortable with testing anyway.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. I know that when we were speaking to Maria McCann, who was, I think, episode 4, we talked about the fact that, people think resist internally can resist, change of the way of doing things and digitising. But in fact, often the fact is their job's more interesting. Because they're not having to do the day-to-day mundane. Yeah,
and I think particularly in PAS, because the challenge of the demand for services were so great that, we were assisting the business greatly in handling that pressure. So that would have, that really helped, I think.
And how far did it go? Did you roll it out for every single appointment from then on, or how long did that take?
Well, I think we ramped it up pretty quickly. We started with the Garda campaign as a pilot. We did a couple of small proof of concepts with it as well. But I think it's pretty much de facto standard for the large scale competitions now.
Yeah.
Now, not for smaller, but certainly for large scale competitions.
And then you've moved on then again, didn't you, was it Department of Agriculture you went to then?
Yes, yeah.
And what year was that?
Let me think. That was probably around 2016. I went to the Department of Agriculture.
Okay.
As a principal officer in charge of architecture and strategy.
And that was kind of Brexit time, was it?
That was Brexit time. Well, initially when I arrived in, it wasn't. It was being touted as a potential referendum.
A mad idea that will never happen.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So I was busily working away on, setting up an analytics unit, establishing a project management function, and then suddenly the opportunity came up where somebody had to build a Brexit system. So I went to my CIO at the time and said, I'd like to actually do that.
Yeah.
Instead of going to one of the development areas. And he said, okay, off you go.
And why did you put yourself forward for that?
I wanted the challenge.
Yeah.
I really thought it was a very interesting project. It was greenfield site because effectively, up until that point, the obligations on the Department of Agriculture were to do phytosanitary checks on animals, meat and dairy products from third countries.
Yeah.
And at that stage, the third country products coming into the country, the number was very, very small. So it was all paper-based. It was very manual. The inspectors would know maybe there's 2 or 3 animal importations happening this week. So we'll go down to the port, check them and potter back, to suddenly the UK becoming a third country, which meant that instead of maybe 2 or 3 lorry loads coming in a week, you'd have 50 to 60 freight lorries coming in a day, maybe more. And under the legislation, have to check up to 90% of
and was this
products
happening,
on that.
I mean, I know that was happening everywhere because Brexit was affecting so many other countries. Yeah. So what was happening in other countries? Were you all consulting one another, saying, what are you going to do with your system? Or how did that work?
Yeah, I know my business colleagues were, we went out, some of us went out to the Netherlands, to the ports out there, because I suppose there's certain countries who would have traded quite heavily with the UK at the time, we being 4 among those, but also the Dutch and the French as well. So we did talk to our colleagues who had similar challenges and had huge port infrastructures already. We didn't. So the project, along with it being a technology project to deliver technology to allow us, somebody who's sending goods into Ireland had to pre-register in advance and send us in notifications. So we had to build a back-end system for that. We also had to build inspection facilities down in Dublin Port. And I know my colleagues...
Physical infrastructure.
Physical
so where
infrastructure.
are we going to put these trucks to inspect them?
Where are we going to pull them in?
Yeah.
Like built roads in Dublin Port to divert traffic off the ferries around green and red traffic light systems. So it was an absolutely massive project at the time.
And it must have been massive in terms of cross-organisational collaboration because everybody was involved. I mean, who was involved?
Yeah, so like we worked very closely with Revenue in particular because Revenue were they were the single point of contact for the ferries. They got the manifests in. They knew it was on the trucks. So that was one of the I suppose the key learnings from that project was working collaboratively with other government departments and how important that became. We had the HSE on site as well. So we were exchanging data between our systems. And you have kind of a war
office then where you'd all come in and say, okay, what are we going to do?
We had.
Did you map out the strategy?
We had a huge program going on that. And then we had individual streams of that program with our colleagues in HSE, with the Food Safety Authority, with Revenue, with the guards who were down at the port as well. And the big challenge on that project was we had, I think initially, the initial date for the UK leaving was like the 29th of March, 2017. So we had to procure a team to help us develop those IT systems. I think we had 4 months to build the initial. So we made that date, we built it. It was the very vanilla system.
Yeah.
And then of course they didn't leave on that date. It was pushed out to May and I think eventually it was in October.
Yeah.
So we had time to kind of put the bells and whistles in at that point and make some of the manual transitions between ourselves and Revenue more streamlined. But it was being in the trenches on that project was a really, really good experience. It was a very agile project.
Why was it such a good experience?
Because you felt there was a really big challenge to the country, to government, to Irish government in particular, and to be part of that, solving that problem, working in a team with your business colleagues, like hand-locked with your business colleagues, going down to where they built the inspection centres to see if the mobile technology we're using, had a signal there, going and setting signals up in the port. And, it was a huge project, great experience to be on it and involved in the team.
And when you say business colleagues, you mean, for people outside of government, they say, well, who's a business colleague?
So a business colleague would be, say, the agricultural inspectors, the veterinary people, our management board, our policy people. Like we had to change legislation as well. So a lot of the time when you're doing something, there's a huge range of things happening around it. It's not just doing a business process redesign. It might also involve a legislation change, or a policy change, or both. So you get to understand really how the business works. And And then the users of the system, obviously.
I was just thinking, did you have time to think about the users?
We did,
You're
yeah.
under
because
such pressure. What did you do?
We did, and ourselves in revenue would have engaged with the truck drivers, the lorry drivers, who were basically the way they worked changed dramatically. You know, like a huge, big articulated lorry arriving in, maybe for Tesco or, you know, for a supermarket chain. With previously they drove into Dublin Port and drove straight out. Were then having to stop, having to wait and be called to a particular lane for it to be inspected or checked. And, you know, I think they worked, some of the bigger retailers in particular worked very closely with the department early on to engage, to kind of put in place the processes that kind of would not eliminate, but certainly ease the requirements on the logistics. And you saw at the time what was happening in Dover and Calais on the French side. But we had a really good relationship. Like some of my business colleagues in the policy side went out and engaged with the truck driver companies, with the big retailers well in advance, and sat down and, you know, this is what's coming, this is what's happening, and kind of encouraged them to, you know, to be prepared for Brexit. And there was a huge campaign to do that, you know, to raise awareness. And I think that was instrumental in making it as smooth as it was for Ireland, because there was a massive, massive impact on the country as a whole.
And in terms of, you know, how do you think we fared in terms of handling it? I mean, I know it's hard when you're in the middle of it and you're part of it, but still, how do you think we fared in managing that influx?
I think we fared incredibly well.
Yeah.
Like our whole driver on that was, we didn't want to have, and like I can still hear the Secretary General, we don't want to have queues in Dublin Port.
Yeah, yeah.
And we didn't.
Yeah.
You know,
no, because it would be so bad, wouldn't it, in every way, psychologically and everything else.
Yeah. So, you know, pull out all the stops, use all the technology, use all the integration that we need to use to make sure we know. And like we knew from our colleagues in revenue sending us on the manifestos, we knew what trucks were on what ships once the ship pulled out of the port in the UK, what was coming our way. And we had that electronically in the system. So we could send that on, and then the lorry drivers could get texts and notifications from revenue saying, go through the green light lane, go through the red lane, pull up with this. So it was a huge concerted effort across government to deliver that project, and it was a very successful one.
And in terms of, you know, the speed of decision making, I presume it's different because you're in a bit of a crisis.
Yeah.
And that must have freed things up to move faster.
It does, but you still have to, I think you do things the way you do in a normal situation, but you do them much faster.
Yeah.
People don't prevaricate about decisions as much. You have to make a decision, it has to be quick. But you do still have to take into account the risk and, you know, what factors you need to consider when you're making that decision. But you don't have the luxury to sit around and mull over it for
No, there's no time.
Yeah.
There's no time.
Yeah.
And did you have much contact with your counterparts over in the UK?
No, because I think the EU, politically, the UK was leaving the EU, wasn't leaving Ireland.
Of course, yes.
So all of the communications on that side were formally done through the EU. And, you know, we were mindful of our colleagues in Northern Ireland because they would have had challenges similar to our own, because they were faced with having to do inspections as well. But we were very much politically, it was dealt with through Europe. So we were focusing very much on delivering the sort of the government approach to the change process.
Yeah. And did you have, who were the vendors that worked with you? What technologies were you, or companies were you working with?
So we worked with version 1 on our side, largely with that. And we would have had...
It's an Irish company, right?
They're an Irish tech company, yeah. So I think, again, as I said, that was a really quick procurement we had to do. So we went out to one of the frameworks for OGP and tendered for a team of developers to develop a solution. We didn't go down the big procurement route. We went a procurement route. So they gave us a team of, you know, highly technically competent, a small enough team, developers and technical leads to work with our own people and to develop out the system with us. So that was a really positive experience, you know, because it was very time-bound, time pressure.
And particularly good that it was an Irish company.
And very good that it was an Irish company as
was
well.
That was just an accident, was it?
Well, it was procurement.
Yeah.
It was proper procurement. Yeah. So they won based on most economically advantageous tender.
And then you know, that was kind of a crisis time. How long was that, by the way? How long were you working there?
I worked there for 3.5 years, yeah.
Okay. So then you decided to take a really cushy number.
Yeah.
So the Department of Justice.
Yeah, well, the CIO role came up for advertisement, and I thought about it, and I spoke to my husband about it as well. You know, did I think?
should say, your husband, does he work in IT as well?
He did for a long, long time. He's out of IT now. He's on policy and budget side, but
and in the public service.
In the public service,
Okay,
in the Department of Social Protection.
Very good.
Yeah. So I kind of thought about, did I want the challenge of the step? And I think at this particular point, the children were a bit older, and I actually felt, well, actually, yes, I think I will throw my hat in the ring. And I did, and I applied for the post, and I was successful in getting the role of CIO in the Department of Justice.
Okay, and then that was just. Did you have was there a strategy you were trying to implement, or you know?
Yeah. So the Department of Justice had actually they created the role at CIO level. Previously, it hadn't been at that level, and they had the organisation itself had undergone a huge transformation and a organisational transformation. And as part of that, they'd also developed out an IT strategy, because obviously the IT function would have to support the new organisational model.
Yes, I think I can remember, as we've been talking, we've touched on so many projects that I know actually won e-government awards. Yeah. So the Ireland e-government awards is not unfamiliar with most of the work you did. We just didn't know it was necessarily you all the time.
Yeah. I wasn't always first and foremost to the front of it.
No, you weren't. You weren't. We have to change that. And then, Department of Justice. Then they had their whole digitisation pathway, hadn't they?
They had the pathway, yes.
And, they had lots of projects they were planning to do in terms of digitisation.
Yeah, they had a strategy which kind of laid out what the general approach was going to be and what the key business challenges and business projects were to be. So,
what was involved in that? What kind of transformation were they looking at?
So what they were looking at then, like I don't like calling it legacy, classic technology.
Oh, classic. Oh, that's excellent. Much better than legacy.
Yeah. So, like a lot of the technology in the department, it had been built as kind of, I suppose, nearly point solutions to, and was quite siloed. So, and again, a lot of paper still in the process, and we needed to be able to, at that point, there had been a peak in immigration applications in the kind of late 90s, but it had started again, and it has started again recently. So there's an imperative to be able to scale up and to deal with.
I'd say there's a lot of pressures, and I think you're underestimating, isn't it? I mean, there's a lot of public eye.
There's a lot of public
eye on immigration
eye,
and how we're going to handle it, and
there is, yeah.
You know, with all the crises that are happening, that drawing more people into the country, you must feel it in there.
Yeah, we do, but it's a challenge we relish. How to deliver our services better, more efficient, how to scale up, how to support again our business colleagues who are dealing with the front line with people applying for schemes and services. So, using technology for me, it's a no-brainer to transform the way we're doing it, to look at our processes. And I think we've moved again, as I said earlier on, it's no longer about using technology to replicate what you're doing, but it's looking at what am I doing, why am I doing it this way, how can I do it better, and then using a technology to support the process.
So what's happening on the ground in terms of what are you delivering to ease up that pressure, and what have you got coming down the track?
So I suppose the first part of when I joined was putting the foundations and the structures in place, so putting the governance in place, choosing the tools and technologies, because there were a raft of technologies there in place. So what was going to be our strategic platform? How
what did you choose?
So we had some Microsoft technology on site. So we had Power Apps in place. So we were using that initially as our moving off Lotus Notes onto Power Apps, trying out to see how that would work, and SharePoint as well.
Yeah.
So subsequently, we've kind of tendered for a strategic platform, which has turned out to be Microsoft Dynamics, which actually fits quite well. But yeah, moving away from that Lotus Notes, and it was a kind of online forms. It's called another technology that we've used, but it's a mishmash of open source and non-open source technology. So I think for me, what I wanted to see was, which I've seen in other organisations, that sort of single view of the customer. This sort of 360 view, focusing on putting yourself in the shoes of the customer and delivering your services to meet that.
And all the
mantra.
camping that we're seeing, right? what's happening to try and ease off all of that?
Of people being
processed more quickly.
Yeah. So, and in fairness to all of the people in the department, the business processing piece, we've been really, really forensic going through the processes, looking at the way we, what we ask, our application forms, how we handle our application process and making it as efficient as possible. So it's been a really joint concerted effort across the department to do that. And then using the technologies then to enhance those processes. So I think one of the examples would have been Ukraine. So I think, I'm trying to remember when I was in, I was in about a year, I think, when the Ukraine crisis happened.
Okay. So again, you start a new job and then suddenly huge comes.
Yeah. And we had huge numbers of people arriving, traumatized from a war zone, landing with, small bags, small children, huge amount of women and children coming into Dublin Airport all hours of the morning, noon and night. And then the social protection were giving them services. There were government services available. iPass were housing them. So we got together from a technical perspective, the IT people got together and the business users, and we got together to try and see could we streamline that. So we built, we used Power App. This was the kind of first time we used Power Apps in anger to build out a Ukraine processing, application processing solution, and to digitize the integration with Department of Social Protection. So we worked with our colleagues there. So we notified them when we gave temporary permission to a Ukrainian, and they automatically issued them with a PPSN, which meant that they could avail of services. So it was, people coming in trauma, and you don't want them to have to come queue up, give me lots of details, then go over and queue. From a business perspective, we based ourselves in the same premises as well. So we had a kind of multi-agency approach at the front end, and then we replicated that then with technology. And
with, I presume, language and those challenges as well, you could adapt to that within the apps?
Well, we would have used, and we still do use interpreters on the ground. We do use AI technology to translate some of our languages on our websites, etc. But sometimes you need a person. It's that, particularly when there's somebody
traumatized, right?
Yeah, somebody coming in at maybe half. We went out ourselves and worked in the airport to see the experience of people coming through, and you're coming in with very small children, maybe older relatives as well. You don't want to be sitting down trying to read tech. The interpreters were part of that process.
Yes. And was that a conscious decision to go out and look and see what on the ground people were dealing with?
No, I think we all did it. At management level, we all took turns going out to help out, roll our sleeves up, and it wasn't just ourselves. Our colleagues from Social Protection, from the Department of Children, HSE, they were all there as well. It was definitely very much an all of government approach.
And in terms of for the role you're in now, what's coming down the track that you're working on that's going to be seen by the public, I suppose?
Yeah, so I suppose what we're working on now are a couple of major modernisation programmes. So what I spoke about there in terms of taking our siloed systems and our old systems and putting them onto a single platform, so that we have that sort of insight, we have that, that view of the customer and what they are entitled to or what they might not be entitled to, and we also have the. We're building out a digital customer contact centre as well. Okay. So using those kind of tools that are available now to sort of be able to ease the burden.
Yeah. And I suppose, Louise, ultimately to maybe speed things up in terms of things being processed. Because I think that's a very difficult thing to be not able to get a process people quickly so they can move on. Either they're going to be here or they're not.
Exactly. And using the tools to help us support that process. We're also, we've opted in recently to the EU Migration Pact, so that'll mean changes to the way we carry out our processes. So
will that be kind of in line with EU policy, or how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it means then that the technology and the modernisation programmes that we're running at the moment, we will have to not adapt, but certainly add in and integrate with the requirements under that opt-in as well.
And look, what do you think about AI? I mean, I can't leave you alone without asking you about AI, right? Because of so much of our hopes, I suppose, and also worries are around AI and what's coming down the track. So what do you think coming down the track?
Yeah, so look, obviously it's a really quickly evolving technology. I remember when I started in Trinity in 1991, we did an AI module.
Oh, very good.
We did, we wrote a chess program.
Yeah.
And we were told it was the next best thing. But obviously, you know, it's other things that have enabled it, like, you know, big data and processing power and all that. Wow. So we now have AI and we're in the middle of the storm of AI. I think there's huge opportunities in it.
What do you think the opportunities are?
Well, that piece about using it for kind of mundane, repeatable processes that you can, and also for supporting things like customer service. The other thing I would see, cybersecurity, for using the AI to assist us in detecting security challenges, using it in my own IT world in the development environment for documenting, you know, the development process manuals. Like there's huge amount of opportunities there that we can use it for. In terms of using it in our systems, like there are governance frameworks there that we work within, like the AI Act itself. And I think actually the GDPR legislation is also a really important framework here. Yeah. Because effectively AI is a technology that is using data, and GDPR is the legislation that governs how we manage the privacy of people's data. So I think those two work very much hand in hand, those two, to set the framework for how we approach our use of AI. Yeah. But huge amount of again, there's that piece of we're in that sort of, you know, the Gartner hype cycle, and there's lots and lots of different types of AI and companies out there, and you don't want to jump into the Sony Betamax, if you know what I mean. Yeah. So there's a little bit of watching and waiting and using what's there. And it's been built into the everyday technologies that we use now.
We're probably using it far more than we even know already.
Exactly, yeah. So, but I think for us in the justice sector, we have to be very careful because it is something that we want to make sure that we operate within the AI Act, the EU AI Act, which does point out specifically that justice and law enforcement is a particular risk area when you're dealing with AI.
And talk to me about, do you see particular countries that are kind of advancing in terms of the use of AI in government?
Well, there have been a couple of countries, I think, that have always been to the fore of digitisation, and Estonia would be one of them.
Yeah, we talked about Estonia. We used to have them come over to the summit to speak. Because they always were leading.
They were leading, areas. But I think the part of the reason they were leading was because they were a greenfield site at the time.
There was no legacy.
There was no legacy.
Start from scratch.
Yeah, exactly. And it's those sort of countries where they don't have legacy when they're jumping in. You see it in India in particular as well. I know India are very much moved to everything is on your phone, your banking, integration with your public services and your business services. So again, where you have that opportunity and potential of not having that classic/legacy environment, it's easier to adopt. But, you know, I think once you move within the frameworks and manage the risk, it's definitely worth taking the opportunities that present to us for the benefit of the organisations that we run and that we use.
And what makes you excited now about the future, about coming down the track? Both for yourself, but also technology, you know.
Well, I suppose coming down the track, what I see, like things we tried to do a long time ago, that is, and we're starting to see it more, is the sort of the cross-government approach to things. And, you know, social protection years ago, when they kind of hived off client identity services and started looking at what became Reach and then ultimately is now MyGovID.
Yes.
Where we're looking at linking services and delivering better services to the public in that sort of...
joined up thinking is the worst word in the world. I know, but we do know what it means, right?
We do know, but I suppose we also talk about user journeys and, you know, that sort of where you're interacting with multiple agencies of the state, that you can do that as a single journey rather than, you know, the sort of going to revenue, then going to the tax office, then going to social protection. Yeah. And it's actually something I did my thesis on in college back in 1995. Yeah. Integrated back-end systems across revenue, welfare. And I think we're now starting to see that. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah.
From a tech and a business delivery perspective.
And the challenges technology-wise are not like they used to be. So you can actually get there.
Yeah.
And I know that Barry Lowry's very keen on that.
He is,
But he works very closely with you and everybody else as CIOs to find out what you want to do. But I think the infrastructure is there, isn't it?
The infrastructure is there. I think we've all sort of in civil service anyway, we've developed technologies which now are loosely coupled, and we can integrate with each other, whether it's like by a flat file or whether it's actually through APIs. There are ways of doing that. And I think the MyGov ID is going to anchor a lot of what we're doing going forward as government.
Reserve your seat at the Ireland e-Government Awards and the Leadership Summit, taking place on the 19th of September 2024 at the Radisson Blu Hotel in Dublin 2. Early bird tickets available until the 19th of July. Full details at digitalgovawards.com.
And finally, let's talk about procurement. It's quite tricky, isn't it? And I know that we sped things up during our crisis like COVID or Brexit. But getting new innovative technology, indigenous technology companies to get a bigger share of what's going on in delivery of our government digitization. Do you think there's ways we can improve that and speed that up?
Yeah, and I think like the OGP have done a really good job in shortening the procurement process, in setting up the frameworks that they have. But there was a challenge there in terms of being able, like if you're not on a framework, you're not at the races in terms of being able to respond to a request. But there have been a few more changes. There were changes in the UK, and I think recently enough in OGP, they've changed the parameters for which you could go out for quotes, for instance. So you can now go out for quotes for like a 50,000.
And what was it before?
I think it was 25,000
so the
before
threshold's
then.
doubled.
Threshold is doubled, and that means you can at least look at, and there's a huge amount of innovation going on in the Irish tech sector, and that gives an opportunity. It's not the best, or it doesn't address all of the issues, but it does give us a way of interacting with that space to do interesting innovation, POV, proof of value, proof of concept, and to expose those organisations to public sector and to government procurement as well. And also to the technologies, which are, can be very, very niche, but really, really interesting.
Yeah.
So I do think things are changing there, and hopefully for the better, that we will be able to kind of hook into those companies, and whether it's through them doing proof of concepts, innovation projects, and then seeing the route through partnering with bigger companies then to come in on bigger
procurement opportunities,
bigger
right?
Procurement, yeah.
And in terms of, if you're looking at the future for the smaller companies, is there things that they're doing? I know the UK are really trying hard to bring in smaller companies into the mix, with innovative niches, if you like. Do you think we could learn things from them, that we could speed ourselves up a bit?
Oh, we can always learn something from somebody else, yeah. And
I mean, not just the UK, anywhere.
No, anywhere, yeah, absolutely. And like that is an area, like I am passionate about technology, and I'm passionate about, more women in technology. But I think that is an area that we've started to eke into by doing things like, increasing those limits and exposing or giving us the opportunity to work with these companies. But there's a huge, there's a huge amount of innovation going on in technology in Ireland, huge amount of really good courses and really good tech startups. And sometimes they end up being swallowed up by the Microsofts or the bigger companies of the world. But it's a good opportunity if you can get in early and work with them and see, how is that technology going to help address our problem? How are we going to help them grow as a company in terms of providing or responding to bigger tenders and getting bigger business as well? So
do you have any tricks, do you think, to get more women involved in tech?
Well, I think there's a few programs out there, like the Maynooth STEM Passport, for instance, and I'm involved peripherally in that. I do some mentoring on that. It's really good in that they're going out to the schools, they're going out to girls' schools and introducing them to tech in a fun way, and introducing them to STEM in a fun way. And I've seen really, really good responses from some of the classes we've been out with. And I think introducing tech early, like primary school level, it's really welcome to see computer sciences now on the Leaving Cert course. Really, really welcome. But get in younger, and boys, girls, they use technology. They're better at using technology than we are. So, get in at it being a potential career, I think.
Yes.
By introducing it at the early level.
Absolutely. In the early. And to make it fun as well, because there's lots of stuff you can do that doesn't have to be too formal. And
I know primary schools are really good at, scratch programming and stuff like that for kids. And I really hope I think we're starting to see more girls coming through, but I think we need to work at it for a while yet.
Well, look, I have to say a few things that are housekeeping on our part before we finish up. One is that the summit, which is taking place as part of the same day of the Ireland e-Government Awards, which is the 19th of September. The summit will be in the morning, a leadership summit, and part of that is going to be inviting new technology companies that are indigenous to Ireland or based here to come in and pitch what they're doing to the audience. So that'll be actually at the awards as well as at the summit. So Excellent. That's our part. And by the way, the closing date for entry is the 19th of July. So hurry up and enter. And Louise, you've been amazing. A fantastic story. So glad we got to do two of them. And maybe you'll even come back when new things happen. And thank you very much for all your time. So that's Louise Jevens from the CIO for the Department of Justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maeve.
So before I go, I mustn't forget to thank some really important people. First of all, our producer, Conla Moran, and then studio manager, Peter Rice. And on sound and video today, it's Lee Brennan, and we're in South Dublin Podcast Studios. Thank you very much.